What was the creepiest thing that's ever happened to you? Story 1. As a child, I moved around a lot because I was an army brat, and I insisted that every house I moved to was haunted. Nothing major ever happened, just weird noises, opening doors, things being in places that made no sense. It was not until my second year at university that I realized I was haunted and not the houses, after my housemate suggested it. Anyway, last year I was on the way to my university house from my job at a bar at about 3 in the morning. To get into the house, you have to walk down a privately owned alleyway. Just as I reached the entrance to this alley, a man ran up behind me and spun me around. He clearly had a bit too much to drink and started trying to grab me, touch me, and convince me to remove my t-shirt. Naturally, I was very uncomfortable and scared. I remembered that the window to the house had an alarm that went off if the window was hit. I figured if I could get down the alley and hit the window, my two male housemates would wake up and help. The only issue was that every time I walked down the alley, he would grab me again. After maybe 5 minutes of a struggle, the man hit me. Next thing you know, the alarm on the window went off, waking up my housemates and scaring off the man. The next day, the police were called. We gave them access to the closed-circuit television footage at either end of the alley, and the man was caught on tape. But since most of the incident occurred in the alley, there was not enough evidence to charge him. Later that day, my housemates and I decided to check the footage to see what caused the alarm to go off. There was nothing. No bird, cat, or any other animal. The alarm just went off. This had never happened before and did not happen any time after either. I am convinced it was my ghost. It used to freak me out, but I am kind of glad it is around now. Story 2. I work at several attractions for the Big Mouse that has tourist destinations in Orlando and Anaheim. When I first started working for the Mouse, I learned that most of the buildings were haunted in one form or another, and generally I take this stuff with a grain of salt. Show me the science or prove it to me, then I will believe. I have had 2 separate encounters with 2 ghosts in 2 different attractions, and let me tell you, I believe a whole lot more now. Experience 1. In a slow-moving journey through time, you come across a scene where a famous painter is lying on his back painting the ceiling of a building. There is a ladder going up to that scene, and the rumor was that a maintenance guy had a heart attack during his shift one night and collapsed at the base of the ladder. No one found him until the next morning, and he was already dead. It became a tradition upon closing the ride for the night to tell him good night, or else havoc would come down upon the ride the next day. Silly, I know, but we all played along, and I never really believed in it because everything seemed very circumstantial. On one particularly slow day, I was riding through the attraction when all of a sudden it stopped in that scene I mentioned earlier. If you have ridden this ride, you know that it is basically a train car with 2 rows. As far as I could see ahead of me, there was no one, and as far as I could see behind me, there was no one. The ride system is pretty sophisticated, and when someone hops out, there are pressure-sensitive mats on one side that trigger the ride to stop and show on our ride display screen exactly where it is. On the other side of the ride vehicle, there are photoelectric beams that also give the exact location of this intrusion, as we call them. We stop this ride pretty often because someone takes too long to get into the ride vehicle, so we stop it and then start it back up again. In this case, they started speaking over the intercom into the entire ride, and that usually means someone is out of a vehicle somewhere on the ride. A few minutes into sitting there, I started to hear keys jingling. 2 sets headed in my direction. I was completely alone, and here came my fellow Mouse employees looking rather concerned. They asked if I had jumped out, which of course I had not, and they looked at each other and then back at me from the opposite directions they had come from. They asked if I had seen anyone, and I had not because it was just me. They said the mat and the I-beam were both triggered in this scene. We all sort of stared at each other and whispered the ghost's name. They left, and within 5 minutes we were moving again, but I never rode alone again. Experience 2. Another attraction I work at is a motion simulator that spins and creates gravitational forces to simulate spaceflight. When the attraction first opened, there was only one option. The story goes that a mother brought her child in to experience the attraction, and when the attraction finished, the child was unresponsive. Emergency services were called, and it was later discovered during the child's autopsy that he had an undiagnosed heart condition. This much is true, and there is a fellow Mouse employee that was working on that day and remembers the story and multiple other Mouse employees have looked up the story, myself included. Since then, it has been said that the ghost of that little boy likes to hang around in the ride room where he died. There are multiple reports of hearing him laughing during opening procedures, of him calling out for his mom, of the sensors going off before the ride starts, and upon checking the cameras, there being things in front of them that definitely were not there before, since we check all of the cameras before the ride starts. Again, I am usually very skeptical about this sort of thing. One morning I was scheduled for an opening shift, which does not normally happen due to my low seniority. I showed up and went to open ride room number 3, which is the room where this little boy met his tragic end. During opening checks, there is one person in each of the 4 rooms, all completing the same tasks. Ride rooms 1 and 2 are connected by a small closet, and ride rooms 3 and 4 are similarly connected by a small closet. We usually do not chat in the mornings with the person opening the other ride room, since we are all trying to get through our checklist as quickly as possible. I got to the part where I was about to run the ride and check for errors at the end of my checklist, and went in to start closing up my vehicles. It gets pretty loud in there, to the point where, if we need to get someone's attention, we have to raise our voices. I started to check my ride vehicles and close the first 2 of 10. That was when I started hearing laughing from a little boy. At this point, I was pretty sure it was one of the other openers playing a joke on me, so I moved on. I went to check the next 2. They were good, so I closed them. I heard the laughter again, closer and louder this time. I turned around to check over my shoulder, and there was a faint flicker of movement from the corner of my eye. I went to check and see what it was, and there was nothing. At this point, I was spooked. I hurried and checked the rest of my ride vehicles, closed them up, and did a final check of my ride room before closing everything up and setting the ride to start. I heard the giggling again, turned around like last time, and there was a faint shimmer disappearing down the hallway. Of course, I chased it to see what was there. It turned out to be nothing again, so I went to the other ride room to see who was opening over there. It was a girl that I had worked with quite a bit, and she normally opens and told me she has had similar experiences where it looks like someone is watching you or just out of the corner of your eye, and there is no one there, and that the laughing sometimes gets to be downright creepy. Multiple people have encountered this little boy ghost at various times during the day, mostly under the conclusion that he is lonely. Story 3. I lived in an old house converted into a duplex in Athens, Ohio, which is reported to be one of the most haunted American cities. During the first year I lived in my apartment, I frequently noticed this strange music that seemed to be coming from inside the house. And it is hard to describe, but it sounded like a keyboard or an organ, faint and played in a minor key, and always sounding the same. Regardless, I just assumed it was my downstairs neighbors, and it never bothered me enough to investigate. But it was definitely coming from inside our building. The following year, my original neighbors moved out, and my new neighbor Sarah moved in, and we became friends. One night she was hanging out in my apartment, and the music started up, and she asked me pointedly where it was coming from, and I said I did not know and asked if she had music playing in her apartment. She said no, and we both looked at each other uneasily. Sarah asked me if I ever saw or heard weird things, and I said that other than the music I had not, but the way she asked implied that she had, though she did not want to talk about it. A few months later, her boyfriend moved in, and she later confided in me that she saw and heard things, specifically random tendrils of what looked like smoke swirling inside their bedroom, doors slamming or opening without explanation, and her boyfriend hated going to the basement so much that he would sing the whole time he was down there doing laundry. I hated the basement too because it had not been changed much since the house had been built, and there was a creepy room that looked like where you would keep a captive person, though I guess it was where wood had been stored, and I always felt like I was being watched when I was down there. I graduated and was getting ready to move, and I went out of town for a few days, so my parents were watching my cat at their place a few hours away. The night I got back to Athens, I decided to start packing some of my books, the first items I had packed, and I fell asleep and woke up in the middle of the night to a giant crash. I was tired and disoriented, so I assumed the noise came from Sarah's place. The next morning, I went to my living room to find that a giant antique mirror hanging over my fireplace had crashed and shattered into hundreds of pieces. The nails supporting the mirror were intact and still in the wall. After that, I was finally prepared to admit that the place was haunted. I know Sarah saw and heard way more than she ever admitted, but she did not like talking about it because she still lived there. She moved recently, so maybe I will get more out of her now. I never really believed in ghosts, but too many unexplainable things happened, though I never felt unsafe or like whatever was in the house wanted to hurt me or express anger, except maybe at my moving. This story is not even that interesting, but that is how I have found a lot of people's ghost stories to be, since not everyone has some vindictive poltergeist or whatever. I did do some cursory research into who owned the house, and I learned a woman was the original owner, and back then the house was for a single family. She sounded like a quiet woman, a widow who died at an old age, and in her obituary I learned she loved to play music and had founded the Athens Music Appreciation Group. I wonder if I kept hearing her favorite song to play. Story 4. I used to live out in the country way back, almost to the end of a long, dead-end road. And there were only two houses that were actually lived in that far down, my dad's and the old lady's at the very end of the road. There was my dad's house, and around it off to the side were a bunch of old medium-sized barns and sheds. I used to let my cat out sometimes, and she would roam around the yard and come back up and paw at my window when she was ready to come in. One night I had done just that, but after a long while I got a little concerned because she usually only stayed out for an hour or two tops. But it had been way longer. I decided to go out and get her. I went out through the side door on the house and immediately felt off, like something was there. But I needed to get my cat, and if something was there, I chalked it up to a raccoon or other critter. I grabbed the mag light and set off for the barns, calling for my cat. I found her huddled up in one of the barns, and she did not want to leave, and it was like she was terrified of something and was very stiff when I picked her up. I had not taken but 2 or 3 steps when this light shot across the sky directly over me, illuminating everything almost like lightning, and it made this odd woo-woom sound as it passed. My cat freaked out and started growling and clawing at me, which she never does, and I actually dropped her because of it, and she took off toward the house as though she were running for her life. I did the same. I have never figured out what that was, and I have read about comets and things like that, but nothing says anything about the odd noise I heard or the reaction my cat had. It could have been something simple and explainable, but it really freaked me out at the time. Story 5. Creepy for me, I was having a tense conversation with someone that I was close to years ago, and the conversation quickly devolved into a passive-aggressive fight that ended with the other person getting in the car and driving away. As I started heading back inside, the other person came back, got out of the car, and started our conversation again. But the tone of voice was totally different, and the stance was different, and the feeling in the air was completely off, and I do not know how else to explain it. As the conversation progressed, the other person started saying some nasty and mean things that were completely out of character, and I said, "This is not like you, person," and they said, "What makes you think that I am person?" I remember continuing the conversation and talking to the person for a long time, but I do not remember anything specific, though I do remember becoming more and more alarmed and knowing something was not right. Finally, I told the person to go home, and they complied and left. I went back inside and started telling my sibling about the situation when the doorbell rang after maybe 2 to 3 minutes had passed. It was the person coming back to apologize for the original fight, and they had been driving around town for a long time and did not want to go home, leaving things unresolved. I asked why they had said some of the things from the last conversation, and they looked at me like I was crazy and had no idea what I was talking about. They totally could have been lying, but that whole situation just felt dark, and it scared the hell out of me. Story 6. When I was in high school, my girlfriend's parents would let me stay overnight on the weekends, so long as I slept in their recreational vehicle that was parked in back of the house. I had done it multiple times, and my girlfriend would come sit outside with me for a while until she got tired, and then she would go inside to fall asleep, and I would listen to my Walkman while I tried to fall asleep. I remember one night I was having trouble falling asleep, which was not unusual for me, but as I lay there, I started to notice an unfamiliar background noise, and when I removed my headphone, I realized that it sounded like people outside the recreational vehicle were having a loud discussion, but the number of voices started to multiply and get louder and louder until it was unbearable. I searched round and round, peering out the windows, but nobody was there. And I was very shaken at this point and decided to run into the house and sleep in the living room and try to explain myself in the morning. But the problem was that every time I got about 6 feet away from the recreational vehicle, there would be a flash of white and I would open my eyes and find myself back in the recreational vehicle. Now I was nearly having a panic attack, so I called my girlfriend on the phone and she could hear how terrified I was, so she told me she was coming outside to get me. I heard the backsliding door of her house open. I heard her walk across the deck, down the steps, across the garden stones, and finally her hand fumble on the recreational vehicle door. But when it swung open, no one was there. Now I was pretty much in tears when I suddenly felt the presence of something behind me, and I turned around and found this massive red aura hovering there. And I was overcome with this immense sense of death and dread and felt like I could not breathe, like I was being strangled. I remember feeling like this aura or energy was killing me, like absorbing my life force, if that makes any sense. I dropped to my knees and realized that if I did not break free real fast, I was most certainly going to die. And I do not know where I found the strength, but I willed myself back to my feet and slammed the recreational vehicle door open and bolted for the house. This time I actually got inside. I hollered for my girlfriend and she came downstairs with her mom to much confusion. I explained everything that had happened, getting especially angry that my girlfriend never came outside like she had promised, and she said that we never spoke on the phone and she had no idea what I was talking about. But when we compared our phones, mine showed a 1 hour and 25-minute conversation completed to phone, while hers showed nothing. That was when she and her mom started taking me seriously and began to look quite scared themselves. The rest of the night was uneventful, and her mom let me try to sleep on the couch. But try as I might, I could not. And every time I closed my eyes, I would see a small circle of intensely burning white light. Story 7. I do not smoke, and I do not have many friends who do, but I keep several ashtrays at home just in case. So one day about a year ago, I was looking for some papers, and I found one of those ashtrays in one of the cupboards, and it was completely empty and quite clean, by the way. I was pretty busy that day, so instead of putting the ashtray back in the cupboard, I just laid it on the kitchen table and went to do some repair work in the garage. I returned inside the house about an hour later, and the ashtray still lying on the kitchen table was filled with cigarette ash with no cigarette butts, just ash. I felt a faint scent of cigarette smoke in the house, definitely not as strong as I would have expected judging by the amount of ash. Like I said, the ashtray was definitely empty and clean when I found it and put it on the table. I took a kitchen knife and carefully searched the entire house and nobody was there. And I checked all the doors and windows and they were locked. Then I searched the house again, checking whether any cash or valuables were missing, but everything was there. I called all my friends, even non-smokers, and asked them whether they happened to drop by my house that day, and they all said no. I also inspected the locks for damage, but there did not appear to be any. I changed the locks just in case and had trouble sleeping for days afterwards. I actually stored the ash into the bag, and I still keep it in the drawer just in case, though I doubt it will actually resolve or prove anything. The day after that bizarre incident, a murder took place in my neighborhood when a mentally disturbed girl with a history of substance abuse stabbed a convenience store cashier to death following an argument over a pack of cigarettes. It is very likely unrelated, but sometimes I wonder. I do not keep spare keys in the yard or in front of the door, anything like that in case someone is wondering. Story 8. We lived in a house a few years back, and random things would just go missing, and then they would turn up somewhere else. And we never really thought hard on it because they were never expensive or important things. So because of this, none of us ever mentioned it to each other. Fast forward and my mom loses an earring. Not a huge deal, but it is a nice dangly pair she wears frequently. Maybe a month later, I come home and find it perfectly laid out in the middle of the ground at the end of a high-traffic hallway that has 3 doors at the end. I take a photo and show my mom when she gets back, give her back her earring, and we discuss the oddity. I mentioned that lately I have been misplacing random inconsequential stuff like staplers. And she looks at me and goes, "That is weird, me too." Our housemate gets home, and we mention it, and he goes, "Oh man, so weird. My razor vanished for a while, and I found it back on my sink one day. So basically, we are all convinced there was a friendly ghost attached to that house that just misplaced things to let us know they were present. Story 9, I had a span of time where multiple things happened to me. Not much, since as I am in college now, but here it goes, and here are a few stories. Some are related, and all happened at the same house. When I was in 6th grade, my friend was over my house, and we were taking turns playing the PlayStation, and I was lying on my bed as it was his turn. The lights were out, and it was about midnight at this time. As I was laying there, I noticed from my left peripheral that there was someone there, and I saw a face, an all-white face with blacked-out eyes, and quite similar to what Michael Myers' mask looks like, but with no hair. This face started to slowly turn in and look at me, getting closer and closer, and I jumped up quickly and turned the light on, and then there was nothing. I was freaked out for the rest of that night. A few years later, I believe I was in high school and I was playing Xbox and my mom was sitting on the computer. I was playing Call of Duty Zombies, and she was playing a dice game, so I can be certain this was not from that, when both of us heard a very loud man say, "I am home," but dragged out. We both just looked at each other wondering what the hell had just happened. Later that night, my mom was in her room just petting one of our cats. And as she was petting him, she was saying, "Hi, Vadi. His name is Vader." And after she said this, she said that someone mimicked back to her hi, almost as if she was being mocked. A few months later, once Halloween approached, we had seen something else, and we had our house all decorated, and it looked pretty scary. Scary enough that I decided to use my uncle's camera to take a picture of our house. Upon further inspection of the picture, I noticed something quite scary, and I zoomed in on our door, and we have a glass door that opens first before the main door. And I saw within the glass a face that had human characteristics. However, the eyes were blacked out, very similar to the thing I saw when I was younger. Story 10, I was a manager of computer repair for a retailer a couple years ago, and we had a client's computer in the back running various malware and virus scans, and I was doing morning paperwork in the back near the computer. This personal computer had its screensaver on displaying random photos from the My Pictures folder, various family members, children's birthday parties, the usual stuff. Then from the corner of my eye, I swear to God, I saw a picture of a woman from the shoulders up with her throat cut. As soon as I realized what I was making out, I directed my full attention, and it was back to photos of a car show. As the day went on, I thought nothing of it and proceeded to continue my work until I was bringing another customer's personal computer to the back to work on, and again from my peripheral, I could have sworn I saw a bloody body bound in the trunk of a car. At that moment, I began to freak out, and I grabbed one of my employees and explained to him the situation. We then sat for 10 minutes and watched the screensaver, since it is against company policy to search through the client's personal files without absolute just cause. We then proceeded to see a photo of 2 bodies in a shallow grave out in the woods and another photo of a severed hand down in the kitchen drawer. I then went and got the general manager and informed him of the situation and had him view this screensaver. We then felt that it would be in everyone's best interest to contact law enforcement. In about 15 minutes, the owner of the computer and another gentleman showed up, and I proceeded to tell him that his computer was not ready, and it would be a while. He then informed me that he was called there because someone reported that we had found some photographs of a grisly murder. I showed him his computer, and then his partner began to laugh at him. Apparently, he went against police policy and took some of his work home with him and had never noticed his work photos were being used as a screensaver. Story 11, I used to drink with my ex's mom's ghost, so I am really good friends with my ex's cousin, and he used to house watch for his family who lived out of state, and their spare house that he watched had an indoor pool, so of course we had to drink there all the time. My ex's mom had some serious alcohol issues and died of intoxication on that property about 15 years prior to this. A lot of people we brought over there claimed to see the ghost of Debbie, but I had not seen her yet. Well, until the day I broke up with her daughter, and that night Debbie slammed a door right in front of my face. I instantly knew it was her, though I was not scared at all. I knew she should be mad at me because I left her daughter to hang. About a week later, I was going to meet my friend over there to chill, but he told me to just let myself in because he was a bit behind. So I ended up pouring myself a drink and sat down at the grand piano. For whatever reason, I felt the need to tell Debbie my side of the story and let her know that I really did love her daughter. and it really was both of our faults why we had to go our separate ways. After feeling like a fool for talking to thin air, I poured another drink and started playing the piano, until all of a sudden I felt a really cold hand on my back, but no one was there. I felt really comforted by this though, as if she put her hand on me to let me know she understood my position. That house is sold now and no longer in that family, but I live a few miles away, and I still drive by every once in a while and wonder if the new owners have seen Debbie as well. I kind of want to stop by and ask, though I also do not want to creep out the new owners, so I just let it go. Story 12. So when I was 18 and in my freshman year of college, I was out on my own for the first time in my life, and I learned the hard way that I never developed any kind of internal structure in my life, and that my parents always making sure I did my homework and went to class was something I relied on. Long story short, I did not do either of those things and I got straight fails. The writing was on the wall for a while, but it was all still a huge shock to a guy who was all A's and B's and got like a 15,000 scholarship. I am not sure what happened, but I found myself sitting in this big bay window on the 4th floor of my dorm, about to throw myself off. I was ready. I had to convince myself that I was never going to be the person everyone had expected of me, that I was worthless and good for nothing. I had not exercised for 3 months. I had isolated myself from all my friends. I leaned forward and I swear I felt a tugging at my shirt pinning me in place. I knew I wanted to, I had to, and I could not face my parents as a failure. But something kept me on that ledge until some passers-by saw me and had the resident assistant come and talk me down. It probably was self-preservation kicking in, but I swear it felt like every bit of me wanted to be human jelly on the concrete. Whatever it was, I am glad it was there. I am doing a lot better now, and I hope whatever it was is still out there, stopping people from making the ultimate mistake. Story 13, I have posted this before in plenty of Ask Reddit threads, so if this seems familiar, it is probably because you have read it from me before, and I just like to keep my experience out here. I wrote it out and explained every little detail like a story, so I could best explain what it felt like to be out there when this happened. And this is not a no-sleep story or creative writing. I understand if you do not believe me, I would not either if I had not seen it myself. And that being said, let the copy-paste from my previous comment begin. This is going to be a bit out there for most people, but what I am about to type out is true and actually happened to me. And if you choose not to believe me, that is fine. I would not expect you to. Just do not be a jerk about it. This all happened around late May to early June in 2017. I live out in Kentucky and have been here my whole life, and I saved up some money and bought my first AR-style rifle, a Ruger AR-556 for anyone who cares. I had wanted one for a while but never had the money to get one, so as soon as I got a chance, I grabbed it. I needed to sight in my gun after I bought it. My family owns over 20 acres of land, so I do not go to gun ranges around here because first of all, people are dumb, and our local one has bullet holes in the ceiling, and second, I prefer shooting on our own land. I had managed to get a Magpul D60 drum magazine at Gander Mountain because they were having a going out of business sale, so I guess really I was going to sight in the gun and test out the magazine's reliability. I barely had the magazine out of the box and had not gotten a chance to shoot it yet, but I looked up a bunch of reviews and could not ever find one that had the problems mine did that day. This is where things start getting a bit odd. My family has owned this land I shoot on for decades, and nothing weird has ever happened out here that I know of, and I have taken people to the spot this happened at, and nothing has recreated the feelings I had that day. I grabbed my gun, the drum, and 20 rounds of ammo, and went outside to cross over to our field. To get to the field, I have to go through a barbed wire fence and about 300 foot of wooded area. The moment I crossed over the barbed wire, something felt off. I have been over there 1,000 times before, and like I said, nothing weird had ever happened down there. And I have never had any weird experiences there. Something just felt off that day, like something wanted me to leave. I kept going though, because nothing had ever happened out here before. I just thought maybe I was being paranoid, or the wind and air pressure were just right to give an eerie feeling, so I walked on deeper into the woods. The further I got, the stronger the feeling was, and I felt like I was being watched, like something nearby was just staring into my soul. I kept going. I got halfway, and this feeling was borderline unbearable. I stopped dead in my tracks and thought to myself, something is off. Like I have said 1,000 times, nothing like this has ever happened before. I knew something was going on now. When I grabbed my ammo when I left home, I did not load it into the magazine because I wanted to hurry and get to the field so I could get everything set up. This is where I listened to that gut feeling. I stopped dead in my tracks and loaded the magazine with the 20 rounds I brought. Something told me that something was not right and I needed to be ready just in case. And something was watching me, and I did not know what it was or where it was. As I was loading my magazine out of nowhere, I smelled something dead. It just came out of nowhere. I had been standing there for 2 minutes with no scent. Then all of a sudden it smelled like a month-old rotting carcass was beside me. I looked around, and directly behind me was a mangled animal that, aside from the smell, looked nearly fresh. It was so mangled, the only thing that gave me a clue as to what the animal was the color of what was left of its fur, which was a white-gray color. It was a rabbit or possum. The smell did not go along with the age of this. Whatever I caught the stench of, that was not it. I finished loading the magazine, immediately stuck it in my gun, and held the bolt open. That way, if I tripped, my gun would not fire accidentally. For some reason, I kept going. I was nearly out of the woods and I could see the field I was going to dead ahead. That was when it happened. This entire time I had been walking alongside a creek. The creek turns to the left as you approach the field I was going to. As I got to the turn in the creek, I heard a large splash in the water. I turned quickly, and what I saw, I will never forget. This thing was easily 8 to 9 feet tall and stood on 2 legs, and aside from the water splash, it was dead silent. It had very long arms and long legs. It was a light brown color, almost the color of a deer. Updating this to say I got thinking about it the other day, and I think it was much lighter brown than a deer. It still had a brownish look to it, but not that dark. Maybe it actually was gray, and the lighting made it look a light shade of brown, but it looked like skin, not fur. Perhaps the freakiest thing about it was its size. It looked severely malnourished, very skinny and tight skin across its body. Imagine taking a fully grown man that only weighs 120 pounds and stretching him out to be 9 feet tall, but he stays the same width and does not get skinnier as you stretch him out. It had somewhat of an odd walk too, but this could have been caused by the mud near the creek bed. It never faced me, so I did not get a chance to see its front. It just kept walking and never turned around. This scared the absolute life out of me. I was 99% sure I knew what this thing was. I tried to close the bolt on my gun to chamber around just in case this thing turned around to fight. I had no intention of shooting this thing unless it gave a sign it was going to attack. If it was what I think it was, the gun would not have done anything but made it angry anyway. When I tried to chamber around, the magazine would not let go of the round. The force of the bolt closing would break your finger if you were to close it on your finger. I had been loading and unloading the magazine the day before to help loosen the spring to make it easier to load in the future. I could take the rounds out with my hand, but when I came across this thing, somehow it decided it wanted to keep the bullet. By now the thing was gone, and I was basically sitting there with nothing to defend myself. That magazine never worked right again. I kept it a few more days, but had to send it back because it was tearing up my ammo. It would hold on to bullets so tight the bolt tried to close and just scratched a gouge so deep in the casing powder was almost leaking out. After it walked off, I realized if I had shot, I would have deafened myself. It caught me so off guard, I almost fired a 5.56 round in a heavily wooded area without ear protection. I had brought some with me, but did not have it on. Now to answer some questions. What was it? To be honest, I have no clue what it actually was. Me and a friend who knows more about this stuff than I do did some looking around and have narrowed it down. Skinwalker, goat man, or what I am afraid it is, a Wendigo. If you want a very good idea of what it looked like, look up the Wendigo from the Game Until Dawn. Aside from the color, it is exactly what I saw. And before anyone thinks I am just describing the one from the game, I did not even know about the game until after I had my encounter. When I saw the gameplay, it actually made me very uncomfortable because of how much it resembles what I saw. Everything I saw matched a Wendigo perfectly. Stench of death, mangling animals to scare or intimidate humans. Long arms, malnourished, tight skin. Most are gray, but I have heard about brown ones, except one thing, its behavior. They are supposed to be hyper-aggressive and basically kill anything they see or drag it off and eat it alive. So why did it not get me? It had ample opportunity to, but never did. Why did it walk off and turn its back toward me? I have not told my family mainly because I do not think they will believe me, and they will think I am crazy. I think my dad could have possibly seen it or something else at one point too. Before I saw it out of nowhere, he started burning sage around the house, saying that he liked the smell, even though he has never said he liked it before and has never burned it here before. Now for some info about the land. In case anyone did not know, the Wendigo is a Native American legend. They are a human who resorted to cannibalism, and a Wendigo spirit took them over after they ate and turned them into this monster. I live in Kentucky. There were and still are Native Americans here. I find tons of flint every year on my family's land, the same land I saw it on, and an occasional arrowhead. They were definitely on my family's land. My mom has a lot of Native American blood in her, so that means I have some too. And now for the most important part of the story, me and a friend who I have told the story just realized 2 weeks ago that there is a Trail of Tears site less than 5 miles away. Just checked, it is actually just over 2 miles away from my doorstep. It is entirely possible this thing could have come from that. Story 14. This incident happened to my aunt and uncle, who are very straight-laced, wholesome Christian types, and it was the mid-1990s and they had just been married. They were looking for their first place together and were on a budget as both had just gotten out of college. They found an apartment that was affordable and made an appointment to check it out. When they arrived, they noticed the apartment building was adjacent to an old cemetery, and the woman showing the place mentioned that previous tenants had mentioned strange activities in the apartment, drawers being opened, doors slamming shut. But overall, the incidents were few and infrequent, if you believe in that sort of thing. They did not think much of it, and they were not the spooky type, being Christians and all, so they went ahead and got their first place. She said as soon as they got in the apartment, they noticed things being moved. Drawers opening and closing, items gone missing or moved. She said there were incidents almost daily, but that they just tried to ignore it. The third or fourth day they were in their new place, my aunt had just showered and had crawled in bed next to her husband as he had showered before her. For your information, my uncle usually leaves the room when my aunt recounts this story, as it is too creepy for him. So my aunt had just crawled into bed, and my uncle was above the covers reading the paper. She was exhausted and closed her eyes to start relaxing before sleep. She says her husband then turned to her, not saying a word, and started giggling and poking at her like a playful kid kind of thing, then started grabbing her arms and legs. Sort of play wrestling, if you will. "What are you doing?" she exclaimed, to which he did not reply. And she also said he had an odd look on his face that she had never seen, and it was just out of character. He then rolled off the bed, manically giggling, and rolled under the bed and started pushing up on the box spring from under the bed, and she described it as almost taunting. Then in a loud voice she yelled his name and asked again, "What are you doing?" She then heard my uncle's voice say, "What is it?" And she hopped up and found her husband in the living room with his feet kicked up reading his paper. They immediately packed a few things and went to a hotel. They never spent another night there and got out of the lease and only returned with family and friends to pack up. Story 15. When I was 11 or 12, I was in my room listening to my parents arguing upstairs, and I was so mad because they were always fighting, and at the time I just wished they would divorce. So I was standing with my back to the wall facing my bed. Suddenly all my anger turned into this primal terror, and fight or flight kicked in. I had no idea what I was running from, but I ran for my bed, or at least I tried to. I only made it a couple steps before I saw a wisp of black shadow out of the corner of my eye, and felt something grab a fistful of my hair. Since I was running, it caused my head to be yanked backwards, so I was looking at the ceiling. I recovered pretty quickly and made another dash for my bed, where I stayed until I built up the courage to leave my room. A lot of paranormal things happened in that house, but that was the scariest for me. I also worked at a chemical plant a couple years ago as a cleaner. People died out there sometimes, one guy actually within a month of me starting there. There were rumors of certain buildings being haunted. On my third day, first day working alone, I was cleaning the basement of my assigned building. It was very quiet down there, and people rarely came down, but you would always hear if someone was there, because everything echoed loudly. On this day I was down there alone. I dragged some of my supplies from the janitor's closet over to the women's washroom, turned on the bathroom light, put up my sign, and went for more supplies. When I got back to the washroom, the light had been switched off. I thought I must have bumped it on my way out, so I switched it back on and made sure to keep my distance the next time I walked out. I came back to find the light again switched off. The basement already had this creepy feeling, so I was a little spooked. I thought someone must have been trying to prank the new girl, but it was weird that I did not hear anyone walking around. I mentioned it to a couple coworkers later, and they immediately told me my building must be one of the haunted ones. I am a pretty big believer of the paranormal, but I always try to find a logical explanation before jumping to that. But since I have had so many things happen, I cannot explain. I decided to download a Ghostbox app on my phone. I decided to try it out at work a few weeks later. I waited until I was cleaning the women's washroom in the basement before opening the app. I put in my headphones and started asking generic questions like, "Is anyone here?" I kept hearing the same thing come through over and over. It sounded like Ellen or Helen. I kept cleaning, just listening to the ghost box and not talking. I moved on to the shower. As I was standing in front of it about to step in and clean it, "Helen is in the shower" came through clear as day and louder than anything had before that. I left so fast, and it was almost a month before I could bring myself to clean that washroom again. Story 16. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment with my wife, and when you enter the apartment, there is a bathroom immediately to the left, a small open concept kitchen to the right, and past that is the living room. Just outside the bathroom is an old microwave stand that we have a bunch of papers and pens on, in an organizer, some lactase supplement pills, and one of those electric candle warmers that uses a heat lamp to heat up a candle so that you get the scent without actually lighting it. A few months ago, I got out of bed in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, and all the lights in the house were off. I went into the bathroom and sat down on the toilet and messed around on my phone longer than I should have, maybe 10 to 15 minutes or so. And at this point, the only light that was on was the bathroom light. I finished up in the bathroom, washed my hands, hit the light switch, and stepped into the hallway. And this candle warmer light was on. I stopped dead in my tracks for maybe 30 seconds, listening to see if my wife or son, he is a toddler who cannot get out of his crib, were awake. Silence. At this point, I was creeped out and desperately trying to rack my brain to remember if I had turned this light on my way into the bathroom. I knew I did not. I went into the bedroom and woke up my wife, who was snoring and sound asleep. I said, "Hey, did you turn any lights on?" And she told me, "No, you must have left it on." So I said, "You did not turn the candle warmer on?" "I do not think I have ever turned it on." She woke up and we both went into the hallway where this thing was glowing. She said, "You are messing with me. You turned this on." I insisted that I did not because I knew I did not. We decided to check it out. I flipped on the kitchen light and suddenly the candle warmer went off. Interesting, I thought to myself. The warmer is activated by a switch that is on a cord behind the microwave stand, and it would take some effort for a person to reach back there and turn it on. It is not really something you could do without meaning to. We flipped the kitchen light switch back off, and it stayed off the entire time. I flipped the switch on the candle warmer, and it came back on and stayed on no matter what other switches I flipped. We decided that something must be wrong with the thing and tossed it down the garbage chute. I have no idea what caused this anomaly. I am a pretty militant atheist, but this legitimately creeped the living life out of me. I know we have some issues with ground fault interrupters flipping in that part of the house if you flip too many switches in the bathroom at once, but nothing really seemed like it was wired to the outlet that warmer was plugged into. Story 17. I was working at a mall under construction, and it was slowly becoming winter where I am, so that means 5 in the evening, the sun goes down, and 6 in the evening is dark. It was after 5 in the evening, and the mall did not have lights, so we had to work by our work lights. We were the last guys on site, and because he had first aid, my boss and I could work alone. At one point, my boss asked me to go do something in the bathrooms at the back. The bathrooms were down this long hallway, this really long hallway, Lots of turns and such, with no lights besides my phone. So I got to the one bathroom and I was underneath the sink just trying to level out the counters when my phone crashed and it had to restart. I noticed I had like 4% battery, so I turned off the light and figured I would open a door further down the hallway and it would give me some light that I could get used to. At this point, I just needed to silicone the counter to the cabinet, so I did not need much light. I heard something down the hallway after like 5 minutes. I figured it was just my boss, so I continued work. It was super dark at this point, so any light from the outside was pretty much gone. I looked over to the doorway, and I am under the sink across the room, and in the doorway I could barely make out a huge person standing there. My boss was 5'6", so it was not him. I laid there pretty freaked out, and then the figure moved and I asked if someone was there. Then I heard running, pitch black, footsteps hurriedly running away from me. I freaked out, so I went to call my boss because he was like 10 minutes away from me, and I did not know where he was at the time. But my phone had died, so now I had to make it back to my boss, but there was someone in between me and him because the dude ran off away from the door. That walk back to my boss was probably one of the freakiest things because I was expecting someone to jump out and stab me. I made it back to my boss and he said, "Oh, you are finished," and I told him my story. So he told me that we could just finish up tomorrow, and we decided to leave. We packed our tools and brought them with us. The next day there was a toolbox meeting for all of the trades to attend, and some toolboxes had been stolen as well as copper pipe. The door that I had opened for light the previous day led to an area where there were a lot of heating, ventilation, and air conditioning units. However, the area was not very sealed off. You could walk in off the street. What I think happened is some dudes were stealing copper pipe in that area, and when I opened the door, they got spooked. So someone came in to check it out, and when they heard me ask, they booked it and went into the mall. When I left, they must have had another guy come in and help get some toolboxes because a big one was missing. I was super out of shape at the time, and I was recovering from a dislocated pelvis that had been set recently. So it freaked me out, because if that dude fought me, I would have died immediately. Story 18. This happened a couple months ago, and I reported it to the local sheriff's office, and I never heard back. I was with some friends up the local canyon. We were hiking around and eventually set up our hammocks. We smoked some cannabis, and we were having a good time until my friend told us she was panicking. Assuming she just got too high, we offered her water and food and asked her what we could do. She told us in no uncertain terms she wanted to leave because she did not feel right and her anxiety was not letting up. And as someone with anxiety, I agreed that we should leave the situation for her benefit. We packed up and hiked back to the car about 20 minutes away. The sober driver started the descent down the canyon. We were about 10 miles up the right-hand fork of this canyon with no cell service and narrow roads, going about 30 miles per hour when we turned a curve in the road and ahead saw a truck, headlights facing us, stopped in the road. Next to the driver's window was a guy in his mid-20s talking to the driver, and about 20 feet to the left of the guy was a motorcycle neatly laid out on the side of the road. As we approached the truck with our car, we were forced to stop as the guy stood in front of our car and started waving his hands. Immediately, my friend and I noticed he had a large blood stain on the front of his shirt over his stomach. His entire right arm was wrapped in a bandage, the type you would wrap around a sprained ankle. But he did not have any blood splatter on him, his outfit did not look disheveled, and what I am assuming was his bike looked to be in pristine condition and set down nicely. It is hard to explain how perfect the situation seemed, like it was a setup. The weirdest part of this all was the feeling everyone in the car had. Our stomachs dropped. I had an intense feeling of dread and fear come over me. The guy in the road tried to get us to stop our car, and the truck was blocking the other side of the road and was not moving. Usually I am one to help people, but in this case I felt like if we stopped the car and got out, we were not going home that night. I believe my friend had that feeling of anxiety earlier for a reason. I knew we had to leave, so I screamed at the driver, "Do not stop." The guy in the road had a weird look in his eyes, not panic, but almost excitement. She kept pushing her car forward at about 5 miles per hour for the longest 20 seconds of my life, and eventually he realized she was not going to stop and he moved. We hauled down that canyon. The driver and I felt that we had made the right choice to keep driving and not stop, and so did my friend, who had anxiety issues earlier. The other two in the car thought we should have stopped and helped. The five of us all agreed, however, that everyone had a creepy feeling from the situation, and it did not seem right. We do not believe he crashed or really needed help. We think it was a setup. I found it odd he was walking up the canyon for help, and that he tried to stop a car full of 20-something girls for help when there were other cars coming up and down the canyon at regular intervals. It all seemed sketchy. We got out of there and reported it immediately when we had service. Dispatch told us they sent a couple officers up there, but we never heard anything about it. We looked in the local news for the next few weeks and saw nothing related to what we saw. It was weird. Story 19. I bought my house in 2008. It is an old Sears and Roebuck's kit house built in 1923. When I purchased it from the realtor, she said that an old retired city utilities worker had been the only owner of it before I bought it and said that he had maintained it fairly well. She was not wrong either. The only thing it needed was a new roof. I kind of wondered why it had sat vacant for a few years. I found out why a few months after buying it. While moving my stuff into the place, I was storing everything I would not need immediately in the basement. It was a finished basement, so it was not too awful. But I kept hearing noises while I was down there sorting my stuff into things I would need soon, and it can wait piles. It sounded as if someone was pacing from my kitchen to the front door and back. Then a few weeks later, I was down there grabbing some things. I heard a piano above me. Not a grand piano, but a piano you might see in a church. Not an organ, but a smallish piano. I could even tell you what song it was, How Great Thou Art. I did some research on the place. It turns out the retired city utilities worker had died in the bathtub. It was not anything horrific. I talked to his daughter. She just happened to work as a pharmacy technician at the pharmacy near my house. She told me that he had a massive heart attack while he was in the tub. She came over for dinner and found him there later that night. I expressed my sincere sympathy for having to deal with such a traumatic experience. The very next Saturday, I was out doing some yard work, and this little old dude came up to me. I shut down the weed eater and had a chat with him. He said he used to live here, and that he wanted to look at the place one last time before he moved away. He was pretty feeble-looking, so I was not too intimidated. I invited him inside for a glass of iced tea and to check out what I had done to it since he was last in there. He politely declined, said the outside looked beautiful, and he was certain that the inside looked just as good. He expressed his gratitude that someone responsible had purchased the place. He walked away. I started to pull the cord on the weed eater and then thought of something else I wanted to say to the man. To my surprise, he was already gone. Weird. I did not see any cars drive by, and I was positive he could not have walked down the block and around the corner in the span of 8 seconds. It just was not possible. The noises I heard in the house went away after that. I think that little old dude I talked to was the ghost in my home, and he wanted to be sure I was going to take care of the house he bought and built. I still own and live there, and I hope I am taking care of it as good as he would like. Story 20. My best friend called me one night, telling me his roommate was having a problem. We were all 18 or 19 at the time, in the days when people did not really have cell phones, brick Nokias at best. Some weird stuff had been mentioned to me, but it was stuff you could blame on neighbor kids, like banging on the outside walls that faced a field. His roommate's house was at the end of the road in a desert town, so the closest neighbor was a football field away at least. Thinking someone was messing with them, I rallied the troops and we got there. This guy got the house from his grandfather and inherited an RV, the house, and a couple vehicles. Both of them looked sleepless, but not much happened at first. I was the tallest by far, being over 6 foot, and there was a ceiling drop-in right in the living room. I noticed it open a few times and closed it, but by the third time I had everyone try to reach it. There were 2 drop-ins, and without a ladder, no one but me could reach them. About 1 o'clock in the morning, we started hearing thuds on the wall facing the field. My friend said, "This is how it starts." One guy brought a shotgun for some reason, but we headed out to stave off whoever it was. All of us went. No one stayed in the house. I kept looking back at the house to make sure no one was sneaking up on us, but I saw what looks like someone in a hoodie standing in the middle of a big window in the master bedroom. I pointed it out, and we all ran back up to catch the person. There were only 2 ways into the house, both in the front. We split the group and went both ways around. No one came out. No door slams, no running, no one inside. The master bedroom had white walls, nothing hanging on the walls, and the closet closed. Nothing that could be a dark anything to deceive us. Other weird stuff happened, but the crazy one is that the guy who owned the house went into the bathroom. After he left the living room, the drop-in opened in the living room. We heard his voice in the attic start laughing weirdly, and then a pipe wrench came flying out. 3 of us ran to the other drop-in, which was closed and had no ladder. We heard some scuffling, so I reached up and scooted the drop-in open about a foot and nearly lost it, looking at my friend's roommate's face staring at me with a very disturbing smile. I stumbled back and he was gone. I went straight to the bathroom and opened the door to find this guy on the toilet taking a dump, and I had scared him in doing so. No entry into the attic from the bathroom, no windows in the bathroom. I cannot explain it, and I am not the only one who saw these things. Story 21. My husband, kid, and I live out in the middle of nowhere on a plot of land that is about 100 acres. I would say probably 95 of those acres are wilderness with ATV and hiking trails that we and several of the previous owners created by exploring. We use that land for camping, hiking, and hunting. We like to find a spot, clear it a bit, and camp overnight. There is so much space we have never stayed in the same place twice. We have seen some kill sites, both old and fresh, lots of animal tracks, places where deer bed down, and so on. I have even spent a lot of time hiking solo while the kid is in school and my husband is at work. Whether alone or with the family, we always carry a firearm for protection. A few weeks ago, we decided to load up our camping gear and start a new trail. We mark the trails we make with spray paint on trees. We were pretty far in the woods, having hiked almost an hour when the atmosphere seemed to change. I do not know who noticed it first, but my husband, who was leading the 3 of us, turned around and gave me a concerned look. The birds had stopped chirping. The insects were quiet. There were no sounds around us. When in the woods, complete quietness is rarely a good thing. We continued onward, hyper-aware of our surrounding, while our kid continued merrily talking. We came to the stream that marks the midway point of our property. We stopped for a few minutes, my husband and I in a stare down with each other. We both felt something was off but did not want to scare our daughter. I finally broke the silence and said I suddenly did not feel good and that we should go home. My husband nodded in agreement while our daughter voiced her protest. "Too bad, kiddo." We turned around and started back. After going a few hundred yards still in silent wilderness, I looked to my right and saw a person crouched down in a ghillie suit about 150 feet off our trail. I am positive they saw that I noticed them, but they never moved. I cleared my throat to get my husband's attention, and when he looked back, I put my hand on the gun in the holster on my hip, which caused him to readjust his rifle in preparation for anything. I sped up my family and we hurried back home. I told my husband as soon as we were inside. We decided to call the police and report the trespasser. We filed a report and were told to call again if we saw anyone. A few days later, my husband and I went out alone and set up a bunch of deer cams. We did not go back out into the woods for maybe a week. Then he and I ventured out to retrieve the cam footage. Out of the 9 cams we placed, we caught a person in a ghillie suit in 2 images. We handed copies over to the cops to go with our report. We have not gone back out since except to check the deer cams. We have not gotten any other trespassers. It freaks me out even more to think of the few times while camping that we heard walking near our tent in the middle of the night. We always assumed it was curious animals, but now I'm not so sure.